Hello people, I am Inko, and today I will be looking at an older classic that never really got the recognition it deserved, mostly because it had zero marketing and it was overshadowed by what can be commonly referred to as a circus, and the patron saint of PC games. A game where we scam our way into a flight by pretending to be mentally unwell, where we can get involved in local politics and decide whether or not the vomit torture is an inhumane method of punishment for murder, or if it is an outdated, racist practice. Most of the population, me included, voted no, it is not, where we can partake in all sorts of activities, whether it's helping someone find love or providing tonight's entertainment. A game where the smallest of details tell a story, but only if you look for them. Anachronox was developed by Tom Hall, who was one of the original founders of id Software, and released by Ion Storm, a company known only for working in extremes. On one hand, Deus Ex, and on the other, Daikatana. But despite that, Anachronox slipped through, even as the company was effectively dead. Being similarly budgeted and similarly disastrous for IDOS, it pretty much got rushed out before the company could get any more pissed at them, the result being something wholly different than Ion Storm's other two games. Anachronox starts us off in the city, the planet of Anachronox, a planet that was once home to an ancient alien civilization that, overnight, randomly disappeared. Where did they go? Where did they come from? Don't worry about it. Either way, they left behind thousands of homes to be remodeled into low-income neighborhoods. And with no one to call claim, it became the perfect place for fugitives to hide out. As a result, Anachronox is now home to all manner of redditors, e-girls, and degenerates. And we happen to be one of those degenerates under the name Sly Boots, a beat-up, cynical detective who's poor as shit because he spends on average 2 hours of the day being sober. So we can't pay our bar tab, our office living space, or our pending debt with the local mob boss. So our first mission is to find a job. But no one is hiring Boots' specific skill set of being a functioning drunk. Fortunately for him, he got a tip about a job wherein a woman suffered a horrible accident. Boots goes to her to find out she has not been compensated for her injuries, so he decides to find her employer, not to get him to pay her back for the labor she provided, rather to get that pay for himself, because workers' comp doesn't exist in Anachronox. This ultimately leads us to finding Mistech, an ancient form of technology that nobody knows how to use or what it does, but it looks damn cool, so its value is quite high to researchers and private collectors. Boots starts using his detective skills once again in order to question the galaxy's shadiest, most eccentric individuals across several unique and, quite frankly, strange planets. The further he goes, the more his past starts to catch up with him, until it all becomes entangled with discovering the ancient secrets of Mistech, Anachronox, and Boots himself. In order to solve this mystery, we'll have to involve ourselves in the daily lives of the planet's population, which often lead us to very amusing scenarios. The worlds of Anachronox are very good, but first, the combat. It's not very good. That's not to say it's bad, it's just the least interesting aspect of the game. But even then, the game offers a variety of enemies that will entice you with their absurdity. Combat is inspired by older Final Fantasy games, and Chrono Trigger of all things. Basically, everyone is on an individual timer. Once that timer runs out, anyone can attack, including enemies. So it's a bad idea to fall asleep while in a fight, no matter how tempting it may be. And much like a classic Final Fantasy, combat is slow, pretty repetitive, and kind of easy. It's not as thrilling and nail-biting as some of the animations make it out to be. Fights are made more interesting by your party members, that go from Boots, to an old man, to a planet, and to the only playable instance of El Chapulín Colorado. No one's gonna know what that is, but that's okay. Naturally, Paco appeals to my own culture and sensibilities. Party members come in two flavors, ranged and melee. Melee means you have to move them closer to the enemy, otherwise they are useless. But then again, eventually, everyone gets ranged weapons, so all the party members will end up being pretty similar to one another. Finding weapons and skills is a pretty involved process, and I kinda like it. It's not just buying new weapons from the store and moving on. Instead, we have to find them by talking to people and completing random objectives they give us, whether it be snapping photographs, buying drinks, aiding in the resistance, or finding tacos. Likewise, you have to explore to find useful items, whether it be in the cities or in the dungeons. Some items are hidden behind certain skills that require a different character to unlock. Sometimes we can break into someone's hotel room only to find out that they are still inside, but their depression has robbed them of the will to fight off thieves, so he gives us permission to rob him in clear view. So, in a way, exploration is always rewarded with a weapon, healing item, skills, or some random garbage that might be useful later. I should probably mention, dungeons in this game are really good. It would have been easy to just make the objective of every dungeon to be fight every enemy and then a boss fight, and while the game does follow that format, it often mixes things up. Each dungeon offers something different. The first dungeon is entering some coal mines after we blackmail the guard by telling him we know his brother, and it ends with us jet skiing to victory. Other dungeons will be long and elaborate puzzles that you have to think about, be perceptive, and use logic if you ever want to progress in the game, most of the time offering very little fights in terms of challenge. Sometimes the game will throw you into a poisonous maze where if you panic, you die.
Another one has you thrown into a pyramid to solve more obtuse puzzles with vague hints. Or how about being thrown into a spaceship run by a comic book supervillain and all his henchmen? The only negative critique I can give about the dungeons is that they can be kind of hard to navigate, since there are no maps and the paths tend to look very similar. One might even say they repeat themselves, but that's just a small issue. I can appreciate and even enjoy the fact that dungeons don't solely rely on combat and give the player something unique for each one, from challenges to the setting itself. The real meat of combat comes from mistech, which can be used in a variety of ways to inflict status effects on enemies. These are often accompanied by a really long animation that you can't skip. Thankfully, there is a speed up button that I definitely used. These effects can emulate people, freeze them in place, and make them go nuts. The possibilities of mistech grow even bigger when you get the ability to create your own by mixing and matching different types of bugs. And since we're technically the first people to discover them, we have naming rights. In short, combat is inoffensive and unremarkable, not doing anything obscenely wrong, but also not doing anything to make me fall out of my chair. Outside of combat, you'll travel alongside your party and enter a story of galactic proportions, with every planet you visit being completely different and serving as a contained story for more comedic situations. The writing in Anachronox is very good. It's exceptional, not just for the main characters, but for the NPCs as well. Example, this here is Gorilla Bob, the bouncer. He just finished savagely beating a drunk for being annoying and now it weighs on his conscience. Because he isn't one of them violent folk. He's educated. He'd rather have an intellectual debate than fight with someone. He even wrote a book about dragons, but alas, he is stuck in his position as a bouncer. Likewise, NPCs go through character developments in their small stories that you can only spectate. A son says goodbye to his father as he departs for important business. His father tells his son that the experiment will not fail as long as he focuses and doesn't make a mistake. The son then begins to ask questions the father has no answer to, or rather cannot answer, such as who is his real mother and did father plagiarize the peer's work? Once again, the father cannot answer his son and the son walks away denouncing his father. It was a truly tragic tale. The main characters are equally as fascinating to watch. Boots is a great protagonist that is mostly bumbling his way through the story. He comes equipped with his cute hologram GF that's also his dead secretary that he made a copy of. She acts as the in-game cursor and she will sass you, even in the menus. Also, Boots keeps saying her name wrong. Fatima. All the character interactions are pretty great because all of the characters are really well written.
Other sad.
I'm alright, pal.
But you don't have a home anymore.
I haven't had a home since I was 16. I'm okay, pal. Really.
Bad, bitch.
Each character has an outstanding sense of personality that really blend well together, making conversations between them that much more entertaining to watch. The main theme of the story is redemption. Boots is haunted by his past and runs away by drinking, and inevitably it catches up with him, forcing him and Fatima to face the harsh realities and overcome it. The characters all have their moments when they need to step up, regardless of their own personal fears and doubts, ultimately helping them reach that next step to becoming a better person. Except Grumpos. Grumpos knows he's a terrible person, that no one truly likes him, and when the day comes, he will die alone and unloved. He knows this, he just doesn't give a shit. And I think all of us could learn a lot from Grumpos. Unfortunately, the main story is where that rush development is most noticeable. That's not to say the story is bad, only that there are certain moments where it feels like important parts were removed to not miss deadlines. For example, characters get ejected from the story pretty frequently. Grumpos has a big discovery and then stops being in the story until the very end. Ro gets introduced quite explosively, but then doesn't really do much except for a couple of scenes. Pal's another character and he has a single scene that contributes anything to the story. Paco's a fucking comic book superhero, yet he only speaks like 4 times and then just hangs around and doesn't talk with anyone. I feel like him and Grumpos would have had some shit to talk about. I don't know what they would have talked about, but it could have been interesting. The only character I can give a pass for liking any sort of interaction is Democratis, because he isn't a character. He's an idea, a concept, a fetish. He's a planet. So like, how do you characterize a planet? The only thing he really does around us is face discrimination, because there's no place for us planet folk. All of this taken into account, the story still manages to pull itself along because of its stellar writing and genuinely weird twist, as the story gets progressively weirder, and in typical JRPG fashion, ends with us fighting God. But it's important to note, this game is more about the destination than the journey. Before I continue, I must ask you, what is comedy in video games? Is it pop culture references? Could it be perhaps cursing a lot? Maybe it's never shutting up? Turns out it's just being funny. Anachronox may just be the only game that's ever made me giggle, and not from bugs or bad dialogue. I was weary of the funny tag on Steam, but now I realized it was the main selling point. That's why I say, speak to everybody in this game. There are far too many instances where I was giggling to put in this video, plus it would be uncouth of me to spoil them. They're far better when you discover them on your own. Anyway, during a certain part of the game, my crew was looking for a place to rest, which led us to the finest hotel after we bullied a certain individual into giving us lodgings for free. Upon entering the hotel, NPCs talk about how the elevator's not working. Okay, I thought it'll probably get fixed as we progress, and I forgot about it. As I explore the hotel, I go to the utmost floor only to find out why the elevator has ceased to operate. 20 hours later, and after everything that's happened in the story, he's still stuck there. You can find a woman sitting down on a bench casually enjoying her day. Directly behind her is a man who has become smitten by her. As we talk to him, we find out that he is afraid to speak with her because he lacks confidence. So we hype him up to go do it. He freaks out and blames women for his downfall. While exploring, I came across a man and his robot friend. The robot explained how he loved to toss things into the fountain because watching them get disintegrated was incredibly satisfying, that nothing on any planet gave him this much joy. His friend looks at him and breaks the news that he believes this is illegal. The robot is heartbroken upon hearing this and realizes he can only throw one more thing into the fountain. Despite the law not really being enforced, he decides that he's gonna make it count, so he throws himself in. There's a lot of instances like these throughout the game, including the main story. Anachronox has a really good mix of comedy in its story without diluting the important parts of said narrative. Rather, it relies more on putting the characters in absurd situations and letting them play out, thus making sure that every planet has at least one memorable moment. Through most of the game, we arrive at a planet, get told what we have to do, and then it's left up to us to figure out how to progress. That's how the main questline is set up, and we'll have to use detective work in order to find out what we have to do next. And by detective work, I mean just bother anyone you come across. Or we use world skills. Each world skill is unique to each character and they make you play a minigame that's surprisingly kinda fun. Boots has lockpicking to break into places.
Ro can use her intelligence to analyze things.
I don't know what a minigame does or how to play it, but I dig it. Then we get to the cool stuff like Grumples, whose world skill is just not shutting the fuck up until the person relents. But to do that, he needs great bouts of air, so we need to manage his air intake. Then we get to the real wacky shit like Democratus having a council meeting and you having to play whack-a-mole to shoot down naysayers all so we can grab an item. What an excellent democracy they have here, even if they sorta use it to take away choice from the inhabitants of the planet and live as higher, more intelligent beings on their Dyson sphere above the planet, while the planet dwellers are kept in a technologically regressed state so they can never question the ring dwellers. Democratus is kinda wacky, and that's before the inhabitants start directly critiquing the main story. Likewise, as we figure out what to do, they'll lead us into problems and let us meet new people that will leave an impression. For example, when we meet Grumples, he will tell us that the only way we can prove our worth is to bring him a size 5 cop helmet. Easy enough, except we have no idea where to get one. So as common sense would have it, I decide to ask the nearest cop. She gets angry at me for my sexism, taking my size 5 comment as me talking about her breasts. The next guy we meet gets offended because he believes I am calling him small-headed, and he is genuinely hurt.
Finally, after asking around, I come across a cop having a really great day.
I then proceed to guilt trip him into giving me the size 5 helmet. Once I have it, I decide to gloat and talk to him again, to which he changes his mind and murders me on the spot. On Democratus, the main story quest required us to find out what the High Council had decided for each vote. One of the votes was hidden behind a very stern and unhappy woman who would not budge an inch when it came to giving us an answer. Fortunately for us, every person has their weakness, something we can exploit, and hers was sexual frustration because she was a kissless virgin. So while Boots politely declined the offer, Grumples gave her the nastiest, sloppiest kiss you could imagine.
As we go about each world, we can also look for collectibles, which are the Anachronox symbol or the photos of the very eccentric red bipedri. I don't like these very much. The red bipedri is quite hard to find, even though you can hear him humming and singing, you just never know where they are. I much prefer the other collectibles, the taco, which is often a reward for being clever. Now the taco may just sound like random humor, that is until you meet the proprietor of the single taco, and we learn about their story history. Tacos were the must-have item in the galaxy, a luxury, nay, a status symbol. They exploited people's FOMO, and for a while, the populace was happy. Then one day news breaks out that the taco stands for totally arbitrary collectible object, that tacos are useless. This was disastrous news which led to suicide, divorces, and bankruptcies. But eventually, the taco regained its popularity as the nostalgia wave hit, and our proprietor was left in the dust as he sold all his belongings, all his tacos the year prior to stay afloat. Now he possesses nothing and begs us to find him tacos. Anyway, Anachronox. It's an incredible game that managed to still release even after Ion Storm was pretty much dead. And despite the rushed development, the game is quite exceptional. I'd compare it to a solo developed title. and that the ideas, the presentation, the personality all feel like they came from a singular vision. Details that could only make sense to that one developer, to Tom Hall. Even down to the credits, he's there messing with the player by making jokes. But it wasn't a solo project, it was a $1 million project with multiple people working on it. One of them was called Squirrel. He's in the game as a weird child. But even taking that into account, the game feels like a singular vision that makes the game have a unique vibe to it. There's a lot of games similar to Anachronox, but truly, there's nothing quite like it.